$6. That's what your dignity is worth tonight. The words didn't just land. They echoed, sharp and deliberate, slicing through the soft hum of a five-star dining room perched 40 floors above Manhattan. Crystal glasses shimmered under amber light. A pianist in the corner played something slow, something expensive. But now, every note felt off. Every breath in the room seemed to pause. William Carter leaned back in his chair, tailored navy suit untouched by a wrinkle, his fingers resting lightly on the edge of the table as if he owned not just the meal, but the moment itself. Across from him, investors in dark suits exchanged subtle glances, the kind that said they'd seen this before and still weren't sure how it would end. Naomi Brooks stood still, a black apron tied neatly at her waist, a leather check presenter in her hand. She had heard worse. That didn't make this lighter. It just made her quieter. The receipt lay open between them. Total, $312. Tip, $6. It wasn't a mistake. It was a statement. William's lips curled into something almost resembling a smile, but not quite. Go on, he said, voice calm, controlled. Answer one question. Maybe you earn more. A few low chuckles rippled from the table. Not loud. Never loud. Just enough to exist. Naomi didn't look at them. Her eyes stayed on him. Steady. Unshaken. If there was a tremor inside her, it never reached the surface. Around them, the restaurant continued its illusion of normalcy. Servers gliding between tables, wine poured in perfect arcs, conversations stitched together with polite laughter. But here, at table 12, something colder had taken hold. Something quieter. Naomi shifted the check presenter into her left hand. Her right hand rested by her side. Fingers relaxed, not clenched. She had learned that much. Never show tension where power is being tested. William tapped the table once, slow. What determines a person's value? He asked, tilting his head slightly, studying her like she was a puzzle he had already solved. It wasn't a casual question. It wasn't curiosity. It was a trap dressed as philosophy. Naomi blinked once. Not in hesitation. In timing. Somewhere behind her, a glass slipped slightly against a tray and was caught just in time. The faint clink rang out like a reminder. Every movement here mattered. She knew this game, not because she chose to play it, but because she had been forced into it long before tonight. 3 jobs, 2 subway transfers, rent due in 4 days, a younger brother who needed medication that insurance barely touched. People like William Carter believed value was a number, a balance sheet, a percentage, something measurable, something ownable. Naomi inhaled slowly, the kind of breath that doesn't show but shifts everything inside. Then she spoke. Value, she said, her voice even, clear enough to carry but never raised, is what remains when money fails to measure a person. The words didn't explode. They settled. Heavy. Precise. For a second, nothing moved. Not the pianist. Not the investors. Not even William. His expression didn't crack, but something behind his eyes flickered, just once. It was subtle, almost invisible, but it was there. Naomi didn't wait for approval. Didn't wait for reaction. She closed the check presenter gently and placed it back on the table, right beside the $6 tip. No extra movement. No added weight. Just presence. Then she turned. Calm. Controlled. Walking away the same way she had walked in. But something had shifted. Not in the room. Not yet. But in him. And whether William Carter understood it or not, the question he asked had just rewritten something far beyond a tip. The elevator doors closed with a soft, polished chime, sealing William Carter inside a mirrored box that reflected him from every angle. For most men, it would have felt like luxury. For him, it felt like nowhere to hide. The city stretched below in perfect geometry, a grid of lights and motion, but inside that quiet descent, everything slowed. His jaw tightened slightly, not in anger, but in thought. That was new. He had built his entire life on certainty. Numbers. Contracts. Outcomes he could predict, control, and enforce. But there was no spreadsheet for what had just happened. No model to explain why a single sentence from a waitress lingered longer than a billion-dollar negotiation. The elevator reached the lobby, doors opening to polished marble and the faint scent of citrus and cedar. A doorman nodded. William did not return it. Not out of arrogance this time, but distraction. He stepped outside into the crisp New York night, the air cooler than he expected, sharp against his skin. A black car waited at the curb. The driver stepped forward, opening the door with practiced precision. "Home, sir." William paused. Just a fraction. His eyes drifted across the street, where a small diner glowed under fluorescent lights, ordinary and unpolished, the kind of place he had not stepped into in decades. People sat inside without suits, without expectations, without performance. For a moment, he watched them. Then he got into the car. "Yes," he said quietly. The door closed, sealing him back into comfort. But comfort did not follow. The city blurred past the window, lights streaking into lines, reflections shifting across the glass. His mind did not settle. It returned, again and again, to that table. That voice. That answer. Value is what remains when money fails to measure a person. He repeated it silently, testing it like a clause in a contract, searching for weakness, for inconsistency. There was none. That irritated him more than it should have, because it meant something else. It meant he had missed something fundamental. The car turned onto a quieter avenue, lined with townhouses and carefully trimmed hedges. His home stood at the end, tall, immaculate, untouched by time or error. Inside, everything was exactly where it belonged. The lighting adjusted automatically as he entered. Soft, perfect, predictable. He loosened his tie, setting it aside with deliberate care, then moved into his study. Floor-to-ceiling shelves, leather-bound volumes, a desk that had seen decisions worth billions. On the far side, a single framed photograph. William stopped. He had not intended to look at it. He rarely did. But tonight, it pulled his attention like gravity. A boy, about 10 years old, smiling without restraint, standing beside a younger version of William who looked less controlled, less distant. His son, gone for years now, but not absent. Not really. William stepped closer, his reflection merging faintly with the glass over the photo. He remembered something then. Not a business deal. Not a victory. A question. His son had once asked him, sitting at this very desk, legs too short to reach the floor. "Dad, how do you know what someone is worth?" At the time, William had answered without hesitation. Net worth. Assets. Influence. The language he understood. The language he trusted. His son had frowned, just slightly, like something did not fit. William had dismissed it. Children ask questions. Adults provide answers. That was the order of things. But now, standing in the same room, with the same walls, the same power surrounding him, that memory felt incomplete. Or worse, incorrect. William sat down slowly, his hand resting on the polished surface of the desk. For the first time in years, he did not reach for his phone, did not check markets, did not review reports. Instead, he opened a drawer. Inside, neatly organized, were documents most people would never see. Contracts, trusts, and at the center, a folder marked clearly. His will. He stared at it, not opening it. Not yet. Just looking. Because somewhere between a $6 tip and a sentence he could not ignore, something had shifted. And the man who believed he could measure everything was beginning to realize he might have measured the wrong things all along. The folder did not move, but the weight of it changed. William Carter sat in silence, his fingers resting lightly on the edge of the desk, as if touching it too firmly would confirm something he was not ready to admit. The room was still. No city noise reached this high. No interruptions. Just the quiet hum of a life built on precision. He finally opened it. Pages, neatly organized, every clause crafted with intention, every asset accounted for down to the last decimal. Real estate, equity holdings, offshore accounts, foundations already structured to preserve his legacy. It was flawless. It was complete. And yet, as his eyes moved across the text, something felt hollow. Not wrong, just incomplete. Like a calculation missing a variable no one thought to include. He leaned back slightly, exhaling through his nose, his gaze drifting again to the photograph across the room. His son's smile had never needed validation. It had never needed a number attached to it. It had simply existed. And somehow, that had been enough. William closed the folder halfway, not fully, not decisively, just enough to pause it. Because this was not a decision yet. It was a disruption. Downstairs, the house staff moved quietly, maintaining the rhythm of a home that functioned without question. Dinner would be prepared. Lights would dim. Tomorrow's schedule would already be waiting. Everything would continue exactly as designed. But William remained seated, unmoving, caught between what had always worked and what no longer made sense. His mind returned again, not to the insult, not to the $6, but to the way Naomi had stood. Not defensive, not aggressive. Certain. That was the part he could not dismiss. Certainty without power was something he had never respected. Until now. He reached for the folder again, this time opening it fully, flipping to the final pages where signatures held more weight than words. His own name stared back at him, repeated in clean, deliberate ink. Control. Ownership. Finality. He had always believed a will was about distributing assets, deciding who gets what, ensuring nothing is left to chance. But tonight, the concept felt narrower than it should. What if it was not just about what you leave behind, but what you recognize before you go? That thought lingered longer than it should have. He stood slowly, the chair sliding back with a soft, restrained sound. Walking toward the window, he looked out over the city again. New York did not sleep. It recalculated. It adapted. It moved forward whether you understood it or not. Somewhere out there, Naomi Brooks was likely finishing her shift, taking the subway home, counting tips that actually mattered, living in a world where $6 could mean something real. Not symbolic. Not performative. Real. William's reflection in the glass looked the same as it always had. Composed. Controlled. Untouched. But behind it, something had shifted direction. Not dramatically. Not visibly. But enough. Enough to interrupt a pattern decades in the making. He turned back toward the desk, eyes settling once more on the open folder. This time, he did not hesitate. He pressed a button on the desk phone. It rang once. Twice. Then a voice answered, calm and alert even at this hour. Mr. Carter? William's tone was steady, but different. Not softer. Not weaker. Just deliberate in a new way. I need you to come in tomorrow morning, he said. A brief pause on the other end. Of course. What is the matter? William glanced at the document one last time, then closed it fully, his hand resting on top of it, as if anchoring something that had just begun to move. We are going to make some changes. Silence followed. Not confusion. Not resistance. Just the understanding that something significant had been set in motion. William ended the call without further explanation. Because for the first time, he did not need to explain it yet. He only needed to act on it. And somewhere between a question asked in arrogance and an answer given without fear, a man who believed he understood value had just begun to redefine it. Morning arrived without hesitation. Sunlight cut through the glass walls of William Carter's penthouse, sharp and exact, illuminating a space that had never needed warmth to function. Everything was already in motion before he stepped into it. The coffee was set. The news briefings were arranged. The day had been prepared with the same precision that had defined every day before it. But William did not sit. He did not reach for the reports waiting on his desk. Instead, he stood by the window, hands loosely at his sides, watching the city rise into itself. People moved below in patterns that could not be predicted from above. Not entirely. That thought lingered longer than it should have. A quiet knock broke the stillness. Come in. The door opened smoothly, and a man in his early 50s stepped inside, carrying a slim leather portfolio. Daniel Reeves. Trusted. Precise. The kind of attorney who did not ask unnecessary questions because he already understood the weight of what was not being said. You asked to see me, Daniel said, his tone measured, professional. William nodded once, gesturing toward the desk. Sit. Daniel took the seat opposite, placing the portfolio down carefully, his posture straight but not rigid. He had been in this room many times. For acquisitions. For disputes. For decisions that reshaped companies and markets. But something about this morning felt different. Not urgent. Not aggressive. Just deliberate in a way that did not fit the usual pattern. William walked to the desk and placed the folder in front of him. Not opening it yet. Just letting it exist between them. We are revising this, he said. Daniel did not immediately respond. Instead, he studied William for a fraction longer than usual, as if confirming something before proceeding. Of course, he replied. What changes are we discussing? William rested his hand lightly on the folder, his fingers tapping once, then stilling. A redistribution, he said. Not based on previous allocations. Daniel's brow shifted slightly, not in confusion, but in recalibration. May I ask what the new criteria will be? The question hung in the air, simple in wording, complex in implication. William exhaled quietly, his gaze lowering to the surface of the desk for just a moment before lifting again. Value, he said. The word was familiar, but the way he said it was not. Daniel tilted his head slightly. Value in what sense? William paused, not because he lacked an answer, but because the answer was no longer as simple as it once had been. His eyes moved briefly toward the window, then back. Not financial, he said. That alone was enough to shift the entire conversation. Daniel leaned back a fraction, processing. Then how do you intend to define it? William did not respond immediately. Instead, he walked around the desk, moving with the same control as always, but slower now, more intentional. He stopped beside the chair, his hand resting on the back of it, grounding himself in the moment. I met someone last night, he said. Daniel remained still, waiting. A waitress. The word alone carried no significance in William Carter's world. It was not a category that influenced decisions at this level. Until now. She answered a question. William continued, his voice steady, but carrying something beneath it that had not been there before. One I believed I already understood. Daniel's expression remained neutral, but his attention sharpened. And that answer changed your perspective? William's jaw tightened slightly, not in resistance, but in acknowledgement. It exposed it, he said. Silence followed. Not empty, just full of implication. Daniel nodded once, slowly. Then we will need to define this new framework carefully, he said. Legal structures require clarity. William gave a faint nod. You will have it. He turned back toward the desk, opening the folder now, flipping to a blank section Daniel had already prepared for amendments. The paper was untouched, clean, waiting. For years, William Carter had written outcomes before they happened, controlled them, ensured them. But this time, the first line would not come from certainty. It would come from something else, something he was still learning how to measure. He picked up a pen, holding it for a moment before placing it down again. Not hesitation, consideration. There is one more thing, William said. Daniel looked up. Yes. William met his eyes directly. I want her found. Daniel did not react outwardly, but the request registered immediately. The waitress? He asked. William nodded once. Naomi Brooks. The name sat in the room with a weight that did not match its origin. Not yet, but it would. Understood, Daniel said, already making a note without breaking the flow of the conversation. And when she is found? William's gaze returned briefly to the open document, then lifted again, clearer now. More certain. Then we will see, he said quietly. Because for the first time, William Carter was not writing an ending. He was allowing something else to shape it. By late afternoon, the city had already moved on, but Daniel Reeves had not. His office, 12 blocks from Williams Tower, overlooked a narrower slice of Manhattan, less polished, more honest. Papers were spread across his desk, not in chaos, but in layers of intent. Names, structures, legal pathways that could transform a thought into something permanent. Naomi Brooks. The name sat at the top of a clean page, underlined once, deliberate. He had found her faster than expected. Not because she was easy to locate, but because she had never tried to disappear. 2 subway lines. A shared apartment in Queens. Employment records that showed consistency, not ambition in the traditional sense, but resilience. 3 jobs over the past 4 years. No gaps. No shortcuts. Daniel leaned back slightly, reading through the notes again, not for information, but for context. There was something else. A detail that did not fit the usual narrative. Education. 2 years at a state university. Pre-law. High marks. Then nothing. Withdrawn. No explanation listed. He tapped the paper once, thoughtful. People like William Carter did not shift direction without reason. And people like Naomi Brooks did not leave paths unfinished without one either. Somewhere between those 2 facts was the answer to a question neither of them had fully asked yet. Back across the river, Naomi stepped out of the subway station, the late afternoon sun hitting her face just long enough to remind her the day was still moving. She adjusted the strap of her bag on her shoulder, walking with the same steady pace she carried everywhere. No rush, no pause, just forward. The streets of Queens were louder, less refined, but more real. Conversations overlapped. Car horns cut through the air without apology. A man on the corner sold coffee that cost less than the tip she had refused to acknowledge the night before. She did not think about it anymore. Not the man, not the question, not the $6. Because for Naomi, Moments like that were not rare enough to define her. They were common enough to ignore. That was how she stayed standing. She reached her building, a narrow brick structure with worn steps and a door that did not fully close unless pushed twice. Inside, the air carried the faint scent of cooking and detergent, familiar, grounding. She climbed the stairs, each step measured, not from exhaustion, but from habit. Inside the apartment, her younger brother Marcus sat at the small kitchen table, books spread out, a pencil in his hand, tapping lightly against the page as he worked through a problem that refused to resolve. He looked up as she entered. "You are late," he said, not accusing, just stating. Naomi smiled faintly, setting her bag down. "Long shift." Marcus nodded, accepting it without question, returning to his work. That was their rhythm. No need for explanation where understanding already lived. Naomi moved to the counter, pouring a glass of water, taking a slow sip as she leaned against the edge. For a moment, she allowed herself stillness. Not reflection, not analysis, just a pause between responsibilities. Then she moved again, stepping toward the table, glancing at Marcus's work. "You are overthinking it," she said gently, pointing to a line on the page. "Start from here." He frowned, then followed her direction, his pencil moving again, this time with more confidence. Small corrections, small progress, the kind that builds something real over time. Back in his office, Daniel closed the file slowly, his decision already forming. This was not just about locating someone. It was about understanding why they mattered. And for the first time in years, a legal case did not begin with numbers. It began with a question. He reached for his phone, dialing a number he did not often use outside of business hours. It rang once before connecting. "Mr. Carter," Daniel said. "I have found her." A pause on the other end. Not surprise, just readiness. "Good," William replied. His voice carried that same controlled tone, but now there was something beneath it. Not urgency. Intention. "What do you know?" Daniel glanced once more at the file before answering. "Enough to tell you this is not a coincidence," he said. Silence followed, heavier this time. William absorbed it, measured it, then responded with quiet certainty. "Set a meeting," he said. "No," Daniel corrected gently, something he rarely did. "This will not be that kind of meeting." Another pause. Longer. Then, finally, William spoke again. "Then set it up the right way." Because whatever this was becoming, it was no longer about control. It was about understanding something that could not be forced. And both men, in their own way, were beginning to realize that. The call came just after sunset. Not loud, not urgent, but precise. Naomi had just finished helping Marcus close his books for the night. The small kitchen, now quiet except for the faint hum of the refrigerator and distant traffic filtering through the window. Her phone vibrated once on the counter. Unknown number. She glanced at it, not reaching immediately. Calls like this usually meant one of two things. Extra work, or something that cost time she did not have. It vibrated again. This time, she picked it up. "Hello." Her voice was calm, neutral, already prepared to decline whatever came next. "Ms. Brooks." The voice on the other end was measured. Professional, not rushed. "Yes." A brief pause, as if confirming more than just her name. "My name is Daniel Reeves. I represent William Carter." The name landed. Not heavy, not shocking, just familiar enough to register. Naomi did not respond right away. She leaned slightly against the counter, her eyes drifting toward the small window where the city lights flickered without pattern. "I remember," she said simply. No emotion, no reaction, just acknowledgement. Daniel continued, his tone unchanged. "Mr. Carter would like to meet with you." There it was. Direct. Clean. Naomi exhaled quietly, her fingers resting against the edge of the counter, grounding herself in something real. "I am working," she replied. Not dismissive, just factual. On the other end, Daniel did not push. "We are aware," he said. "This is not about your employment." Naomi's gaze sharpened slightly, not visible, but present. "Then what is it about?" she asked. Silence followed. Not empty. Intentional. Daniel chose his words carefully. "It is about a question that did not end where it was asked." Naomi's brow shifted just slightly. That was not what she expected. Not an apology. Not a complaint. Something else. "I already answered it," she said. Daniel nodded, even though she could not see him. "Yes," he replied. "And now he is trying to understand it." That changed something. Not dramatically, but enough to pause her next response. In the background, Marcus flipped a page, the soft sound grounding the moment back into reality. Naomi looked at him for a second, then back toward the window. "I do not do meetings," she said. Her tone remained even, but firmer now. "Boundaries. Clear." Daniel did not argue. "Then this will not be a meeting," he said. Another pause. Naomi considered that. Words mattered. Framing mattered. Especially when someone like William Carter was involved. "What do you call it?" she asked. Daniel allowed a slight shift in his tone. Not softer, just more human. "A conversation," he said. Naomi almost smiled. Not because it was convincing, but because it was careful. "People like him do not have conversations," she replied. "They have outcomes." On the other end, Daniel did not deny it. "That is why this is different." The words settled between them. Naomi straightened slightly, her posture shifting not in defense, but in awareness. Something about this did not fit the pattern she was used to, and that made it more complicated, not less. "When?" she asked. "Not agreement. Not yet. Just information." "Tomorrow," Daniel said. "Late afternoon. Somewhere you choose." That was new. Control, handed over without negotiation. Naomi noticed it immediately. "Why?" she asked again, this time more direct. Daniel did not hesitate. "Because if this is going to happen the right way," he said, "it cannot start on his terms." The line went quiet after that. Naomi looked at the phone for a moment, then back at Marcus, who was now watching her, curious but silent. She walked over, placing a hand lightly on his shoulder, grounding herself in something that did not change based on wealth or power. "I will think about it," she said finally. "Not yes, not no, just truth." "That is all we ask," Daniel replied. The call ended without pressure, without insistence. Just space. Naomi set the phone down slowly, her mind not racing, not overwhelmed, just engaged in a way she had not planned for. Somewhere across the city, William Carter stood in his study once again, looking out at a skyline he had always believed he understood. But tonight, understanding was not the goal. Listening was. And for a man who had built his life on being heard, that was the part that would change everything. The next day did not rush. It unfolded slowly, like something aware it was. Being watched. Naomi stood outside the small cafe she had chosen, her reflection faint in the glass door, blending with the movement inside. It was not a place designed for power. No polished marble. No silent servers. Just worn wooden tables, soft chatter, and the steady rhythm of a coffee machine that did not pretend to be anything more than it was. That was why she picked it. Control, in its simplest form. She checked the time once, not out of anxiety, but precision. If he arrived early, it meant impatience. If he arrived late, it meant disrespect. Either way, she would have her answer before a word was spoken. The door opened behind her. Not rushed. Not loud. Just enough to shift the air. Naomi did not turn immediately. She let the moment settle first. Then, slowly, she stepped inside. William Carter stood near the counter, not seated, not commanding attention, just present. No entourage. No visible security. His suit was still tailored, still exact, but something about him had changed. Not externally. Internally. The kind of change that does not announce itself, but alters everything it touches. Their eyes met. No greeting. No forced politeness. Just recognition. Naomi walked to a table near the window and sat down, her posture relaxed but grounded. William followed, taking the seat across from her without hesitation, but without assumption. For a brief moment, neither spoke. The sounds of the cafe filled the space between them. Cups placed on saucers. A quiet laugh from the corner. Life continuing, unaffected by the wait sitting at one small table. William was the first to break the silence. "Thank you for coming." His voice was steady, not rehearsed. Naomi tilted her head slightly, studying him. "You asked," she replied. Simple. Direct. He nodded once. "I did." Another pause. Not uncomfortable. Just real. William rested his hands lightly on the table, not clasped, not tense. "Open. I have been thinking about your answer," he said. Naomi did not react. She did not need to. He continued. "I built everything I have on the idea that value can be measured, calculated, owned." His gaze held steady on her now. "And I was wrong." The words did not carry apology. They carried recognition. That mattered more. Naomi leaned back slightly, her arms resting loosely, her expression unchanged. Most people like you do not say that, she said. William gave a faint, almost imperceptible nod. Most people like me do not have a reason to. The honesty in that statement did not soften it. It sharpened it. Naomi glanced briefly toward the window, watching a passerby walk by without noticing them. Then she looked back. So what changed, she asked. William did not answer immediately. He reached into his jacket, not for a phone, not for a gesture, but for something more deliberate. A single envelope. He placed it on the table, sliding it forward just enough for it to sit between them. Not pushed. Offered. Naomi's eyes dropped to it, then lifted again. What is that, she asked. William's voice remained calm. A beginning, he said. She did not touch it. Not yet. That is not an answer, she replied. William exhaled slightly, as if acknowledging the precision of her response. No, he said. It is not. He leaned forward just a fraction, his tone shifting, not louder, but more grounded in something real. What changed, he said slowly, is that I realized I have spent my life assigning value to everything, except the things that actually define it. The words settled, not heavy, but undeniable. Naomi watched him, not impressed, not convinced, just listening. That alone was new for him. And you think this fixes that? She asked, her gaze flicking once more to the envelope. William shook his head slightly. No, he said. I think this starts it. The distinction mattered. Naomi reached forward then, her fingers resting lightly on the edge of the envelope, not opening it yet, just feeling its presence. You are asking me to believe that, she said. William met her eyes without hesitation. No, he replied. I am asking you to decide for yourself. The cafe continued around them, unaware that something far larger than money or status was unfolding in quiet, measured words. And for the first time, the man who had always controlled outcomes was no longer trying to dictate one. He was waiting. Naomi did not rush. Her fingers rested on the envelope for a moment longer, as if weighing something that had nothing to do with paper or ink. Around them, the cafe continued its quiet rhythm, cups clinking, voices blending, a barista calling out a name that was not theirs. Ordinary life, uninterrupted. That mattered, because whatever sat between them was not meant to overpower reality. It was meant to exist within it. She finally lifted the envelope, her movements controlled, deliberate, not cautious, not hesitant, just intentional. The seal opened with a soft tear, barely audible over the hum of conversation. Inside, a single document. Clean, structured, familiar in form, unfamiliar in purpose. Naomi's eyes moved across the page, not rushing, not scanning for numbers, but reading, carefully, line by line. William did not speak. He did not explain. He did not guide her attention to any particular section. He simply watched, not with expectation, but with something closer to respect. That, more than anything, was new. Naomi reached the final paragraph and paused. Her expression did not change dramatically. It did not need to. The shift was subtle, internal. The kind of shift that does not show itself immediately, but alters the way something is understood. She lowered the paper slightly, her gaze lifting back to William. You are transferring a portion of your estate, she said, her voice even, grounded, into a foundation. William nodded once. Yes. Naomi held his gaze. In my name. It was not a question. It was a confirmation. In your name, he replied. No hesitation. No correction. Just agreement. She placed the paper back into the envelope, not closing it, just setting it down between them again. Why? She asked. Not defensive. Not impressed. Just direct. William leaned back slightly, his hands resting loosely against the edge of the table. For a moment, he did not answer. Not because he lacked one, but because the answer mattered more than the speed at which it was given. Because I have spent years deciding where my money goes, he said slowly, without understanding where it should begin. Naomi listened, her posture unchanged, her focus steady. He continued, This is not about giving something away, he said. It is about recognizing something I failed to see. The words settled into the space between them, quiet but firm. Naomi tilted her head slightly, considering. And you think putting my name on it makes that right? She asked. William shook his head, just once. No, he said. I think asking you what it should become might. That changed the direction of the conversation. Not by force, by choice. Naomi glanced down at the envelope again, then back at him. You are not asking me to accept this, she said. William's expression remained steady. No, he replied. I am asking you to define it. Silence followed. Not empty. Full. Naomi leaned back slightly, her eyes shifting briefly toward the window, watching the world move outside without pause, without awareness of what was unfolding inside this small space. Then she looked back at him. You do not know anything about me, she said. William did not argue. That is true. Naomi's voice remained calm, but there was weight in it now. You do not know what I would do with something like this. William nodded once more. That is exactly why I am asking. The honesty in that answer did not soften it. It made it real. Naomi let out a slow breath, her hand resting once more on the envelope, but this time not as a test, as a choice. You are giving up control, she said. William's gaze did not waver. I am learning to. That was the moment. Not loud, not dramatic, but final in a way that could not be reversed. Naomi picked up the envelope again, holding it for a second before sliding it back across the table toward him. Not rejecting it, not accepting it, redirecting it. Then start there, she said. William looked down at the envelope, then back at her, a question forming without being spoken. Naomi met his gaze, her voice steady, clear, leaving no space for misinterpretation. Do not build something for me, she said. Build something with me. The words landed with more weight than any contract he had ever signed, because they were not about ownership. They were about partnership. William nodded slowly, not as a gesture, but as a commitment taking form. Around them, nothing had changed. The cafe still moved. The city still breathed. But at that table, something fundamental had shifted. Not power, not wealth, perspective. And for the first time, that was enough.